Hello, my quilting friends. Leah Day here with episode 27 of the podcast. And today I'm talking with Margaret Lewin. She has a website that's Miss Marker's Quilts. She's a long arm quilter. She shares lots of quilt-alongs throughout the year. And she shares live casts every Sunday at 2 o'clock. So there's lots of ways to get in touch and check out more about Margaret. And I think you'll really enjoy this interview. We talk about a lot of different things, and I really found it fascinating just learning about her and her business. And you know, she did some really cool stuff, like built a big building for her long arm. I just think that's really awesome. So a few updates for what's going on around the house. I'm sitting here on the couch and finally getting back to one of my little mini tree quilts. I have stitched, it's kind of a crazy technique. I call it wild quilting or wild applique. And for this one, I layered pieces of lace over just a plain piece of white fabric and then stitched around it in a more or less a tree shape, and clipped out and kept layering the lace until it was thick enough to kind of form a tree trunk and branches. And then I used some silver satin on the bottom to be kind of big chunky tree roots on the bottom. And so I've cut that out, and it's real rough and ragged and raw. And then I had a batting. I had stabilizer and batting on the back. And so right now I'm clipping away the batting, one of my favorite things to do. I'm clipping away this wool batting, and it's going to give it kind of a trapuntoed effect on the front so that the tree is going to puff out and stand out that much better from the surface. So this was a project. I have 4 of these in progress, and I started them earlier in the summer, and then it just had to be set aside. I just didn't have time to keep working on it. And it's really just a fun project, just something that I wanted to pursue and try out. And the reason why I made so many of them is so that way I could experiment and try a lot of different techniques and just play around with how I was going to create these, and also figure out what filler designs I want to do. I know I want to do some fabric painting, pull out my fabric paints and play around with those. I know I want to do more thread work, kind of some dense filler designs. It's so small, like this is like 8 inches wide, and this one's a little bit long, so I might be pushing maybe 15 inches long. I don't know, it doesn't look very big to me. I have so many big quilts going on downstairs that this seems very, very tiny indeed. So, you know, it's just something to pursue, to just try out different techniques and play around with it. And any excuse to clip away batting like this, I absolutely love it. Trapunto, the reason why I have made so many whole cloth quilts over the years is because I love trapunto. And when you do that technique, you basically stitch batting onto a piece of fabric, your whole cloth, your whole piece of fabric, and that creates your design and makes those motifs stand out in kind of a puffy relief. I love clipping the batting. That's part of why I've made so many whole cloths over the years, because I just find it really relaxing. You know, you don't have to be extremely detailed and perfect at it. It goes fairly quickly. I mean, if this was an actual whole cloth, and I wasn't going to paint it and dye it and do all kinds of crazy stuff with it, I probably would be taking a little bit more time and being a little bit more careful about it. But, you know, it's one of those things. I just want this to be casual and fun and really just an experiment and a play of quilting techniques. And I admit, I kind of got stuck on these. You know, I was working on them pretty steadily, and then I got to the stage where the tree was stitched, and I'd already clipped away 2 others, and they're ready to go. And I got kind of stuck on it because I felt, you know, that hesitation. What if I mess it up? You know, what if I take some stitches on this, or what if the design that I pick is going to be bad? And I thankfully ran into that issue on one of my wonky Christmas trees recently. I did some bobbin thread work on one of my wonky Christmas trees, and it turned out bad. So I had to kind of work through that whole nonsense in my head and just deal with it, and just, you know, kind of be like, well, I messed up that one block. I'm not going to rip it out. I got to keep moving. I want to finish this. You know, how do I do that? And somehow working through that and not throwing that quilt in the trash really helped. And it helped me get unstuck on this project. So moving forward, I'm just going to go with my next best guess. So it's like, what do I think I should do? Well, on this one, I think I should take it downstairs and do some fabric painting on it. I think it needs to be 2 colors. I think there needs to be like a dark gray on the bottom and then maybe a lighter blue up top. I don't know, but I want to play with that. So I'm going to go throw some fabric paint at it first off, and then after I do that, then I'll throw some thread at it. And that's my next best guess. And so that's the next thing that I'm going to do. When I get stuck, my tendency is to throw something in a drawer so I don't have to see it, and then pretend that I never made it. So that way I just pretend that it's not there and it's not a UFO, and you know, who cares, because I can't see it, it's not in my way. Well, with these, because they were upstairs on the long arm, there's not really room anymore. There's all my bins and all my drawers are filled up upstairs, so there's not really a place to stash them and hide them from myself. So they were always out kind of on the counter, and anytime I wanted to use the long arm, I had to pull them off and throw them on the floor. So it was always a junky mess, and that kept it kind of as like a toothache, like continual reminder. You've got to go back to that. You've got to, you know, address those quilts and figure out how you're going to finish them. And I know they're going to look amazing when I actually, you know, get a little bit more thread on them and start actually doing something with them. And even if it doesn't turn out perfect, I'll have learned something, and the next batch will be even better. And the next batch will be even better after that. You know, it's one of those things. I get stuck all the time, and I have to figure my way out around it and keep on moving, keep on grooving. And sometimes, you know, put something away for a little while, put it in timeout, and then pull it back out again. You know, it just have to flow with it and just allow yourself to be creative and have a fun time with it. And, you know, look, it took like, what, 5 minutes to cut this out and get it all done. If you're watching the video of the podcast on YouTube, then of course you can see these beautiful quilts as I'm stitching on them or cutting them out. But if you're listening to the podcast, that's fine too. I try and describe everything so that way you know what I'm working on. This one in particular that I've just picked up, I have my second one now, and it is all green and brown velvets, little velvet scraps. Anytime I go to a show and I find little scraps and bits and pieces of things, I always grab those kinds of grab bags. And this one was from one of those at QuiltCon that I picked up. Okay, so that's what I'm working on right this second. What about the other projects we've got in progress? The photos are going really, really well. I'm very pleased. I've finished 2 quilts this weekend, which feels amazing. I feel like I'm at that stage where things are moving and grooving, and that feels great. And of course, because I've had some success with it and I've learned a little bit more about Lightroom and photo editing and taking the photos, I feel a lot more confident about it. And I think that especially the last 2 weeks ago, and then the podcast before that 4 weeks ago, I was feeling really self-conscious and worried that, you know, my photos weren't going to be very good. So I think that it just took a little bit more time and a little bit more practice to gain that skill with photography. And then too, I started seeing the finished photos, and they look just as good, if you know, as other photos I see in professionally published books. So I don't think that the book is going to be is going to look like, you know, your Aunt Nellie's self-published cookbook that is kind of like, oh my gosh, you know, what is that? Is that a cookie or something else, you know? So there is always that fear, I have at least, of self-publishing and it being kind of a glaring, oh my gosh, this looks like it, you know, is very obviously a self-job. And so my goal is always to make it as professional as possible, if not even better, because I was able to take a lot of machine shots. I got all of my individual designs stitched out, and I was able to take a lot more machine shots, like in-action photos on the machine, and that really came out good. I'm really excited about that. And because I've gotten so many of the photos knocked out, I'm feeling a lot more excited about the book and that whole thing kind of wrapping up. And I have yet to see the design pages that my layout artist has been working on. So that's still kind of, I don't really know what that's going to look like yet, but I'm really excited about it. And I can't wait to see what she's doing on her end and then seeing the photos getting spliced in that I've taken, I think it's going to come together really, really well. At least that's my hope. I finally put together, one of the quilts has been in pieces. It was a quilt as you, I have 2 quilt as you go quilts for the book. And one of them has been in pieces forever. I mean, I think we started the blocks on this quilt back in July last year. So this thing has been in pieces for a very long time. Dad quilted most of the blocks himself, and they were a good first step for him learning walking foot style quilting. And then they've just been kind of sitting around ready to be photographed and, you know, put together. Finally got that quilt put together, and I had been feeling kind of ho-hum about it, like, you know, it's kind of cool. But then as soon as they actually went together and I started seeing the photos and videos of the finished thing, I don't know, something about it totally transformed, and now I love that quilt. Now it's my favorite quilt in the book. But what's funny is every time I finish one of these, it becomes my favorite quilt in the book. So I think that's just the way it ends up rolling. That one was particularly fun because I shot some extra videos just sharing the quilt as you go technique with really big blocks. I've never done that. Most of the quilt as you go I've done, I think the max I've put together before now was like 14 inches. These blocks were 26 inches square, so that's huge. I mean, these were quilts. These are like baby quilts all by themselves, and when they came together, made a really nice, I mean, it could be a full or queen size quilt, square, so it's not really technically a queen, but you could put it on a bed, most definitely. So that was really exciting. I love seeing that put together. Now, if I seem really chilled out and happy today, it is because it is the first day of school and James is starting 4th grade. So got a really good first day of school picture of him, and he is just really growing up. But before, you know, I think up until about 1st grade, it would make me really sad on the first day of school, especially when he started pre-kindergarten. That was like the, oh my gosh, you know, he's so grown up. But pretty much after that, you know, it's just been a joy to see how he's transforming and growing up, and I'm just really loving that. And I love the school year. I love having time to myself in the morning, and I love having James on a solid schedule because it's really good for him. And I just love how that sets a pace for our family, and it seems to work so much better. In the summertime, I really struggle with not having enough alone time. I'm very introverted. That does not mean shy, in case you're wondering. I'm not a shy person at all, but I am very introverted, which means the only way that I can gain energy and rebuild energy is by being completely alone. And what was interesting is whenever I met Josh, I realized almost immediately he was very introverted, but I was kind of in denial about it, about my own introvertedness. I know this is so silly, but he was the one that was like, you know what, actually, I think you're even more introverted than I am. Like, I am actually more of a, I want to be alone, please get away from me kind of person than Josh. And I've never met anyone more introverted than he is. So anyway, that was kind of funny. And part of the reason why we work so well together is that we could go 3 or 4 days and be in the same room together and not really need to have a conversation. I mean, we can have a conversation, but not really need to, you know. I could happily be completely alone for 3 days and, you know, might be starving for a conversation by the end of those 3 days, but I'm perfectly happy by myself. So really the school year sets a pace for us, and it also gives me that alone time that I need more than anything else. So that's why I'm really happy. School started, back on track, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how James changes throughout this year. It's 4th grade, so that kind of blows my mind that my kid's growing up so fast. And I just hope that he has a really good year and learns a lot. You know, that's always my goal, is just, you know, do well in school, learn a whole lot. It's the only thing I think of all the things I could give my child, a good education is the only thing that can't be taken away from him. So it's one of the things that I really emphasize, even if he goes into a creative field. And right now he's been talking about being a photographer. So, I've been kind of encouraging him down that path, and right now he's saving up for a big camera of his own. So, if he becomes a photographer, it's not like he's going to need to do calculus or something like that, but I still want him to be able to do those things if he wants to, So it'll be interesting to see how this year goes. I know I'm really looking forward to this winter and things cooling down finally and going into this fall. The fall is my favorite time of the year. My birthday is in October. So really, it just feels like the summer is finally coming to a close and today is a relief, and that feels wonderful. So that's it for the updates around the house. Our sponsor for the show this week is a new product we have at leahday.com. It's a 2-pack of micro tip glue bottles. So I use one bottle for holding Elmer's glue, which I use for applique and a lot of different quilting techniques. And yes, Elmer's glue is just fine to use in your quilts. It's acid-free, it's washable, it washes right out, but it holds very securely. So I use that for applique. I also use the second micro tip bottle for holding sewing machine, oil, sewing machine oil. And that way I can use the tip to put out a single drop of oil exactly where I want it on the machine. So you can get a 2-pack of those bottles and a great price. Check it out at leahday.com/glue. And now let's meet Margaret Lewin. Hello, my quilting friends. I'm here with Margaret Leuwen. Welcome to the show, Margaret.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Now, a little introduction. Margaret is the owner of Margaret Lewin Quilts and Miss Markers Quilts. You can find her website at missmarkersquilts.com, and you can also find her on YouTube, where she shares helpful quilting tutorials as well as a live cast every Sunday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. She also hosts many quilt-alongs throughout the year, so let's talk about that. What are you sharing with quilters right now?
For 2017, we've shared a number of different things. One of them that we're doing is a different quilt of the quarter, and it's made with fat quarters, and every quarter it's a brand new quilt. So far this year we've done what we call Olivia's quilt. That was done up in 2 different fabric ways. We did it in me and my sister from Moda Fabrics, one of theirs. And then we also did Morning Walk by Leah Duncan. And that just was a gorgeous quilt. In fact, that's the header on my Facebook page. The second quarter, we did what was called Lion's Quilt, and that's spelled Lyon. And that was done in so many different fabric ways. It was a lot of fun. That one was using a different way to put strips on a basic block and then triangles on the corner. But the way that we did it was a way that you end up with a square block no matter what you do, which was a lot of fun. Right now we're working on the 3rd quarter quilt, which is AJ's Christmas. That is a extremely different Christmas quilt. It's made with K Facets fabrics, so it's a little wild. It's a little outside of my comfort zone, but I am enjoying it. And then in between, we've done things like, right now we're doing the Maxwell bag, and we have also done the Beetle bag, along with a couple other little small bags.
Excellent. So are all of these projects designs that are created from other designers, or are you designing and creating the patterns yourself?
The quilts of the quarter are all my designs that I've designed and we're putting together. The thought process when I started it was, I've got a ton of fat quarters laying around, and I really needed to start using them up. So I came up with the quilt of the quarter, figuring that I would at least get 4 stacks of fat quarters out of my way before the end of the year.
I love that. I have a huge stack of fat quarters myself. That is a really good idea. And I know a lot of quilters collect fat quarters. So I think it's wonderfully titled, as well as, and, you know, of course, a quarter of the year. It has so many different meanings. I love that. Yep. So tell me about your design process going into it. Do you set yourself some parameters other than that you're using fat quarters? Do you set yourself any kind of limitations, like no triangles, anything like that, to keep it simple?
No, I don't. I don't set any limitations at all, except for the fact that I want to be able to do it out of fat quarters. And with the exception of the third quarter quilt, I want to be able to make it multiple sizes. So no matter how many fat quarters you have, you can do it along with us.
Wow, so it's exponential. So you have to calculate not just for one pad, like one size, you're having to, like, how many different sizes are you doing?
Olivia's quilt we did from a table runner all the way to a king, and Lion's quilt we did from a throw to a king.
Wow, that's a lot of work.
Yeah, but you know, nowadays with things such as EQ, makes it much easier to do the multiples. The first two quilts I used EQ to do. The third quilt is completely and totally out of my head, and that was totally different to design. It is a Christmas tree, and then there's packages, but I didn't want it asymmetrical. I wanted it really whimsical. So I literally had to make the boxes, the bows in the tree. I put them up on my design wall, and now I'm going back and actually taking the quilt apart to get it into something that's a strip type quilt to make it easy for people to put together.
That makes sense. And kudos to you. That sounds like a lot of work. It's not easy.
It's a lot of fun. I've learned so much from it that it's been great.
Yeah, and tell me about where you put your quilt along. Do you have it on YouTube? Do you have it on your blog? Like, where is the interaction happening?
The interaction happens in a couple of different spots. I am not great at writing directions. I can tell you how to do something, but I have a difficult time in writing directions. So what I figured out that I could do, and this all started with my daughter years ago, and I'll explain that in a minute, but what I do is I do the teaching part of it on YouTube, and the fabric requirements and the sharing of pictures all happens on Facebook.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so your daughter helped you figure this out?
Well, what happened, I have a child that is in the service, her and her husband are, and she was all the way out in Idaho, and she said, Mom, I want to know how to tie a quilt. Well, I tried to write her directions on how to do it and just realized how ridiculous it was. So I grabbed the camera and sat down, and we put it up on YouTube just so she could see it. So there's the very first video I ever did is still there, and it's a video of myself, my sister, and my mom teaching my daughter how to tie a quilt.
Oh, that is so wonderful.
Yeah, it was really sweet. And since then, so many times, you know, she'll say, Mom, how do I do this? Well, I can just so easily do up a video, and then she can see it.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I could shoot a video in 5 minutes and teach you something and show it to you versus trying to write it down makes me crazy. I force myself to do it, but you know what? I like your idea. Just do the video. So I noticed on your website, it kind of went through it and did some cyber stalking. And I, you know, it's one of those funny things. It's like, how much can I find out about somebody in a short space of time? So I did notice that you have a blog, and you know, that's not been quite as much of a focus maybe recently.
It hasn't been a focus in a long time. What happened was I just didn't seem to get any followers on it. And I just thought, well, I've kept it. It's kind of on the back burner, and I have left it at that. I really was just focusing on my long arm quilting business and my YouTube channel. What happened was a couple of my YouTube followers just kept begging me to do a Facebook group. And I finally said, okay, I'll do it. And that was when my daughter Lindsay said she'd give me a hand in it. And I did it, and it just seems like things have exploded since then. It has grown so much. Good. And that was just this year we started it.
Excellent. Yes, Facebook groups are such a good way to connect with people. And you know, that's the one thing that Facebook hasn't like stopped people from seeing. Like when you write something in a group, you actually get the update, and that's so important. So I like what you said about blogs. And I kind of actually agree with you. I think that they're getting less traction now because of YouTube and because of Facebook and all that kind of stuff. So I completely agree. And you got to do what you feel like is the most important and best for your time more than anything else. So tell me about your long arm quilting business. How did you get started, and what do you do now?
My sister owned a quilt shop, and she needed an additional long arm quilter. And I, at the time, had decided that I was going to retire. So I started quilting for her part-time. She's my sister. I wanted to help her out. And what ended up happening was I fell in love with it. The minute I touched that machine, I just was like, I love this. So instead of retiring, I went out and bought a Gamble Statler.
Excellent.
Yeah. I started out in the basement of my home. You took out a wall to make the thing fit and all of that. And 2 years ago, my husband built me a 24 by 30 foot studio.
Wow.
So now I have everything incorporated into one room, and I love it.
Very nice. So 24 by 30, is it like a steel building, or is it like a barn you can just plop down in your backyard?
Well, what it was it's a pole barn that was put up, and the entire building is substantially bigger than that. My husband has part of it for his shop, and then I have part of it. The entire building process of it is actually on my YouTube channel.
Cool.
So you can see the construction of the studio right from day one when we actually broke ground from the very, very beginning. So that's on YouTube if anybody wants to see it. But my section is the bigger of the two sections. I have 2 stories, so I have 50-some feet of storage upstairs, and then I have my long arm, my sewing table, my cutting table, a small corner where my office is, and a wonderful patio to go sit on in the summertime.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. I'm so glad that you shared that too. I did something similar with a small cottage. I call it the Crafty Cottage. I did the same thing. So I'll link yours up too, because that'll be great. I love showing quilters that you can do this and you can make the studio that you really want to work in. That's wonderful. So
one of that I loved about my studio is the only new things that I have in here are IKEA drawers. That's it. Every piece of equipment in here was repurposed. An old office desk that I picked up for $100. A piece of plywood became my sewing table. So it was really neat because I got to use some imagination and do some different things when we built it.
Absolutely. And it makes it even more creative that way, I think.
I agree.
Wonderful. So tell me about your long arm quilting business. Are you still on the Gamble Statler Stitcher?
I am still on the Gamble Statler. I love it. I've been doing it for just over 5 years now, and that is my full-time job.
Excellent. And so how do people mostly send you quilts? Do they mail them in, or are they local? Where are most of your customers?
Both right now. I had started out mostly doing local quilts, but now I seem to be doing a lot of mail-in quilts. That's another thing that I think has happened through Facebook in this Quilt of the Quarter. People are, because I'm interacting so much more with them, they're seeing my work and then sending me their quilts.
Yeah, and so as part of your quilt along, are you sharing quilting advice, like how to actually free motion quilt it or machine quilt it themselves?
Ironically, no. I send them to you for that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I do straight lines really well on my domestic machine. I've become so spoiled with my gamma that it's so easy to just throw a piece of fabric on there and have at it that I leave the domestic up to the experts, and I'm not an expert at domestic free motion.
But could you share a video for someone who has a long arm? Have you thought about that?
I have not. Well, wait a minute. Let me back up. I did a couple of times. Some people were asking me how I set things up and did a quilt, and I did a few times show bits and pieces on the long arm. My biggest issue with that is very rarely do I ever get to put one of my quilts on there. And putting customers' quilts on there, I just don't always feel right about it.
Yeah.
You know, the biggest thing is you want to show them how to overcome a problem. Well, I really don't want to put a customer's quilt on there and explain how to overcome a problem, because I think every quilt is perfect.
Exactly. Here's this big giant mistake in Susie's quilt, and here we're going to do a whole YouTube video about it. Yeah, I think Susie might get a little offended.
I think so too.
Oh, okay. And that totally makes sense. I think that the biggest thing that quilters struggle with is the design aspect. You know, how do you quilt it? You know, what design goes where, and what is your main thing that you end up quilting? Do you mostly do edge-to-edge kind of pantograph style designs, or do you do custom work? What's your specialty?
I actually do a lot of both of them. I do the edge-to-edge, but one of the things that I love to do is take a designer's pattern and make it my own pattern. I've done a couple of videos on how I do make the decision to quilt. I normally take a look at the quilt and I find an aspect in there that stands out. Something that looks like the creator was really drawn to that part of the quilt. And I'll use that as my inspiration to jump off of, to pick out a design for it.
That makes total sense. That's exactly how I do it too. Sometimes the quilt has to stay up on the wall a little longer if it's being tricky or doesn't tell me how it wants to be quilted. But yeah, and also too, busy fabrics. Do you tend, when a fabric is, you know, like all the fabrics are really busy, do you tend to just say, hey, we might as well edge to edge stitch this? There's not really much of a point in doing a really impressive design.
Absolutely. In fact, I have one on the long arm right now that the front of it is plain and you can see the design on the front. But when you flip this thing over, you're not going to see one bit of that design at all because the backing is so busy. I'm drawn to solid colors for backing. I can't help it. You know, as a long armer, that's my joy in life, and being able to turn a quilt over and use it two-sided instead of just one.
Exactly, double-sided quilts. And has that affected the quilts that you create and what you buy in the fabric store? Do you tend to buy now solids or solid reading prints?
I do tend to go more towards solids or solid reading prints. I love to do things with a lot of white space, you know, just to go nuts. The one that I'm working on right now with K Facets fabric is probably the busiest quilt I've ever done. And but there's a lot of white background in it. So once I can get that on the long arm, that's going to be a blast to work with.
Absolutely. That sounds so beautiful. I have also a stack of K Facet fat quarters that I need to cut up, so I might just join you for that Christmas quilt. That sounds wonderful. Yeah. So whenever you got into long arming, did you know what machine you wanted to buy? Do you have any advice for picking out a machine or a frame system for someone new getting into it?
I knew that I wanted it to be my business, and I knew that it was going to be the bulk of where I was going to be. My sister had a gamma statler. That was what I learned on. When I did the little research that I did, it just kept taking me back to the gamma, because it would allow me, at that time when I bought it, the best of both worlds. I could do free motion when I wanted to. I could do bantographs. It had a computer system with it so that I could make alterations in patterns. I had a pattern not long ago that I absolutely loved. It had gorgeous flowers in it that had both density and open spaces. So with wool batting, it would just absolutely pop. But there was a bird. And I didn't like the bird. It just didn't go with the quilt that I had. So I took the bird out and made the quilt pattern anyhow. And it just, that's one of the things that I loved about my gammal, and I still do.
Excellent. So if someone was getting into it and was like shopping around for a machine and planning on starting a business, what would be your advice for them?
Oh,
well,
don't expect to make a whole lot of money real fast. It takes time. I do love my gammal. I can't help but push somebody towards it. I think it's one of the best machines that I personally have found. I would tell them to find what fits them the most comfortable. There are so many machines out there nowadays that the gammal may not be the most comfortable for them. It was for me. And go to AQS shows, test them out, drive them around, and don't ever feel like you're hogging a machine when you're there. Spend time on it. It's a huge investment, and you want to know that you're getting what will fit you.
Absolutely. So as far as building the business, did you take how long did you say it took before you were kind of breaking even on the machine and the investment and all the costs that were initial?
I was blessed in the fact that I truly had retired. So I was able to, at that stage in life, buy my machine.
Yeah.
I would think that it probably, if I had all of those additional costs along with it, probably 2 years.
Mm-hmm. So it's definitely something to get into and be like, this is what I'm doing, period. No question, I'm going to be successful with this.
Right. Yeah.
That totally makes sense.
You spend a lot of time at quilt guilds. You spend a lot of time at quilt shows. You tell everybody and their brother, this is what I do.
A lot of personal marketing, it sounds like. And that's been good with your YouTube channel and the Facebook. You said you started seeing a lot more clients coming from online, so you're getting a lot more quilts shipped in?
Yes, I am.
And how does that work? I mean, does anyone get fearful about, having their quilt shipped back to them? Have you ever had any issues with that?
Knock on wood, I have not at this stage, but I'm also very careful. I ship priority mail, USPS, and they're insured, and they go back, and the customer knows that they're coming before I mail them. So you do everything that you possibly can to oversee them. And, I haven't had any issues yet, and I only had one person who said they didn't want it shipped to USPS, they wanted it to come FedEx. So I sent it FedEx. To me, that doesn't enter into the equation. If they want it sent another way, I will. But so far, so good.
Yeah. So your perspective as a long armer is pretty unique, and this is something I'm kind of getting into. And what I noticed, I've rented some time on a long arm, and what I noticed immediately was suddenly it became very obvious when a quilt wasn't straight and square. So, and that doesn't matter at all when you quilt on a domestic. Like, it totally doesn't matter. So tell me some of the issues that you've picked up on, and some things that quilters that are just piecing tops need to start working on.
One of the things that I found is the most difficult is people truly believe that you can make a block and not square it up before you put it in a quilt. And you really need to. And that was the inspiration behind the second quarter quilt, was I wanted the people that were quilting with us to all feel that joy of it went together great. And so when I designed the block, I went, okay, let's have a block that no matter what, the 3 steps to make the block, they have to square it up. And that's what I did. The difference in the number of people that said how much they learned by doing that, that just made all the difference in my life. The other thing that I see a lot is people don't understand the proper way to put a border on or to measure for a border. They'll say that you can take the border material and lay it across the center of the quilt and just hack it off. Well, you can't. You need to measure the top, the middle, the bottom, add the 3 numbers, divide it by 3. That's the length of your borders. And once people understand that that border is just like a picture frame, it's securing everything on the inside, then they start to get it. But the biggest 2 things that I can think off the top of my head are not squaring up their blocks and also not preparing their borders correctly.
Yeah, and that oftentimes with borders, I notice it, especially if a quilter tries to force it, like, stretching one or the other to get them to fit together. When you're long arming that and you see that issue, how do you deal with it?
Oh, well, you loosen up your 2 end wheels, and then you take your hands, and you put your hands on either side of the long arm head, and you play trampoline with the quilt. You push it around so that what happens is you can gather up that fullness within the quilting.
Huh, that's so interesting. And does that sometimes affect the designs that you plan to put on the quilt?
You take that into consideration when you're picking out the design. It gets to the point that you truly can just see if a quilt is not square when you're looking at it to begin with, and then you're going to pick a design that's a little bit more forgiving than one that's not.
Yeah.
Real geometric ones are the hardest. If your quilt is not square, a geometric design will just pop right out. You'll see it immediately.
Yeah, all those straight lines and sharp angles will just magnify it. I completely agree. So tell me about your YouTube Live. I noticed that you are sharing like a live cast every Sunday. When did that get started and how is it going?
It's going great. It got started again because of Facebook. That's what started all of it. They wanted to do live sessions with me, and I tried doing a few with Facebook and just didn't feel the comfort zone that I did inside of YouTube. So I pulled them over to YouTube. We spend about an hour on Sundays. I sometimes will do a hint or some type of a tip or show them something, but what it ends up really being is just friends getting together for about an hour. That's what it's ended up being. They ask me questions, I answer them. It's nothing for one of my family members to pop in for a minute, so you see the absolute truth of my life. My grandson, his name is Boone, and he tends to be in and out a lot with my daughter because my daughter does she watches the questions to make sure that I catch all of them. So usually he's there. It's Sunday afternoon at my house is basically what it is. So I show him a lot of times what I'm working on, what's up on the design wall. I get a lot of feedback from them as to what it is that they're looking to do next. That helps me with planning projects coming along. But it's just a nice little chat session for all of us.
That's wonderful. Yeah, and I love that. That's why I created this podcast, just to have a chat with a friend, and make more friends. I think that's wonderful. So doing the quilt lines, let's go back to that. How much interaction, like step-by-step tutorial, like you do the tutorials through YouTube, but do you field a lot of questions? Do people get confused? Like how do you answer all of those questions and keep people, everyone on the same page?
Actually, I never thought of it because we don't tend to have a lot of it. Every once in a while, somebody will have an issue. If they do, I don't have a problem popping on Facebook and saying, okay, come on, let's see if we can get it figured out. I think I've done that to date twice. My daughter helps to watch the questions on Facebook for me. So if someone has one, I can pop on there and do my best to answer it in that time frame. And quite honestly, if there's something that one of them are asking, then I know I need to do something with the video because it didn't answer it. There was one project that we did, the beetle bag. I did have to go back and film another spot because they just didn't get what I had done. So I went back, refilmed it, and then that took care of the questions. So they're almost like my editors.
I
They
know.
make sure I've got it.
Wonderful. That's so good. And do you ever find that overwhelming? You know, every once in a while we do paid quilt-alongs, and you know, if I accidentally put something in there that's wrong, it really stresses me out. Do you ever feel that yourself?
Absolutely. In fact, on the very first quilt, Olivia's quilt, I had a wrong dimension in there to begin with on a cutting. And I just spent hours agonizing over it. And I finally said, Margaret, you're human.
Exactly.
Give yourself a break. And since then, although I make mistakes, I try really hard to forgive myself, because if I don't, I'd spend too much time beating myself up, and then I don't get on to the next project, and that's not good.
Exactly. And when you notice something like that, you know, just mostly just make another video. Is that usually the solution? And you know, post it on Facebook, post it on the YouTube.
Yeah, where I have found, quite honestly, where the mistakes have come in is in the written material, not YouTube. Like I said in the beginning, let me sit down and explain it to you and I can do it, but don't ask me to write it. So that's where I have found the issues, and then I just immediately repost it.
That makes sense.
And let everybody know, if you've got the first one, there was a mistake, this is what the mistake was, the new one's there.
Excellent. So where are you planning on going with this? Are you going to maybe make some paid patterns in the future and start charging for it? Like, where do you want to go with the quilt-along?
I don't know yet, believe it or not. I was supposed to have this path, and that was all dictated out exactly where I was going to go and what I was going to do. And there was a Y in the road, and I liked the Y too. So I'm not 100% certain yet. I love doing my quarterly quilt-alongs. I know for certain I will do them again in 2018. I haven't decided beyond then. I would like to start teaching more. I'd like to travel and teach more. Truly, I enjoy traveling, and I love teaching, and I would like to meet these women that I'm spending time with and enjoying.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, going to Facebook and saying, hey guys, who wants to have me?
Yep. I've had a couple of them that have asked me to do a retreat. And I may end up doing that in 2018 if I can find the right accommodations. My want list is bigger than what I've been able to find so far.
I completely understand. Yeah, we've thought about doing that too, and it seems like a lot of work. I mean, it would be so much fun, but you know, hey, why don't you crack the code on that and then tell me all about it?
I said to my husband, if you watch our YouTube channel, this studio is my dream come true. Absolutely. And last March, my husband had a dream come true. And it was 60 acres of land. And it's very, very close to our house. I said to my husband the other day, can't we just build a retreat center for me right there? I could have everything. He said, Margaret, I just built you a studio. Now you want a retreat center? Well, you know.
We want all the things. Oh, well, I'm sure we could keep on going all day, but I want to let you get back to your long arming. So this is the last question I always ask everybody, and that is, what are you looking forward to most in the next 5 years?
In order of their priority, watching my grandchildren grow, being a part of the family that I love so much. And then on the business end of it, being able to teach more and quilt more and just enjoy life.
That's wonderful. I couldn't ask for more than that either. That's just amazing. Margaret, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I have enjoyed getting to know you so much. Can you share with everybody where you are online, where they can find you on YouTube and Facebook, everywhere else?
You can find me on Facebook at Margaret Lewin Quilting and YouTube at Margaret Lewin Quilting. And my website is Miss Marker's Quilts, which I have a funny story. For those people that are substantially older than you, there used to be a Walter Matthau movie, which was Little Miss Marker. Gentleman had put his daughter up as his gambling marker to Walter Matthau. And this little girl just trailed after him at every place that he went. So Walter Matthau started calling her Little Miss Marker. My mother named me that as I trailed after her the first probably 5 years of my life and never left her side. So that's where it all came from.
That's wonderful. Well, I hope everyone will come and check out your website, and if they're needing long arming help, they'll come and send their quilt to you.
Thank you so much for having me.
So that's it for this episode. If you'd like to find more episodes of the Hello My Quilting Friends podcast, check it out at leahday.com/podcast. We have a player that will play through all of the episodes shared so far, so you can binge listen for hours on end. Until next time, let's go quilt.